So today I want to cover the Fire King deck and talk about the positioning in the current meta. So if you're new to my channel, I usually try to avoid covering super generic meta stuff and usually try to take a bit more of a creative angle towards deck profiles, but always maintaining the competitive aspect of deck building and gameplay and showing combos and playing through stuff and whatever. But recently, one of the things that I found very interesting is how a lot of the meta decks and non-meta decks are having to adapt to the driving forces of non-engine as of Raid to the Abyss. So Mulch Army Fuelos is one of the biggest driving forces of the meta right now because it changes the types of decks that are good based on how well they can play under this card. So you may have heard that Centurion is gaining popularity because this doesn't really lose to either Mulch Army, neither Fuelos nor Perulia, because of the way that they play. They do have lines under Shifter, and they also aren't hurt by Droll at all. Well, the like basic core Centurion combos really only need to search once. Obviously, if you're doing other searches with like Lubellion, because Bestial Centurion is kind of like the version of Centurion right now. And so that type of deck, despite being far weaker in terms of the actual engine than most of the other good decks, is so much better positioned than most other good decks that it now has a place in the meta. So Fire King, I feel like, has kind of like an interesting story when it comes to meta positioning, and I wanted to talk about that. I'll also show you a few sample combos so you have an idea of how the deck plays. And if you saw my Mermill video, by the way, I will get back to that. I just wanted to do Fire Kings first as like an intro. Okay, so what we're looking at here for this deck profile is kind of like a summary of some of the highest placing Fire King profiles that I've found so far. There are a few things that it's worth mentioning are either not standard or maybe just not agreed upon. So Oak in the main is absolutely not standard per se. There are people who play it and people who don't. You may have noticed if you're following just like pure Snake Eyes type builds that the conversation is more should you play 1 Oak or 2, and some people even saying maybe you should play 3 Oak because it can be kind of like a starter depending on the other types of cards in your deck. In Fire King variants, not every Fire King variant even plays Snake Eyes cards at all, and one of the downsides is having to add in Snake Eyes Flamberge Dragon. Obviously, you don't want to be playing Snake Eyes the Abelstar when you already have the Fire King High Avatar Runic, so the old chicken, and then the new chicken. Like these are cards that you don't really want to draw. I guess this is not as bad. And then the little chicken is kind of like your normal summon. So having to play cards like Flamberge when you already have some low quality cards like Hallowed Azamina, just in terms of things that you don't want to see in your opening hand, you would rather search, makes it to where just more bricks when you're at a small number of bricks is a high percentage increase of bricks. But the idea here is how many engines can you put into your deck without hurting yourself and still keeping synergy. So if you have some way to access your Snake Eye engine, you know, for example, through the original Sinful Spoils, and you are playing the entire Wanted package, there are some disagreements in topping profiles between how many copies of which you should be playing. Some people play even only one. I think that's a little bit risky when you have Bestials in the meta, because you do, in certain combo lines, as I'll show, kind of need Witch in the graveyard to go through your basic lines. But yeah, the idea is that if you do have additional engines that have synergy with the rest of your deck, then your opponent has to have more hand traps to stop you, or more interruptions, or a more established field to stop you. Whereas if you have more restricted lines and there are only like a couple plays that you really have, then there's less you can do. But one thing that I've noticed can be sometimes a slight clash in this deck is if you look at the number of normal summons here, okay? So there's Ulcanix, which is also at 3 is not standard. Some people play 1, some people play 2, some people play 3. I put it at 3 in this deck profile because a lot of the topping profiles have mentioned in their videos that they wish they played more of this card. Also, a lot of people are not on 3 Kirin, but they'll say in their profiles that they wish they played more. So I've kind of slightly adapted this to be both an average of existing topping lists and also things that people wish they'd changed. That does mean that the deck count does go up to 46, but as you'll notice, a lot of the cards that a lot of people would not be playing, for example, like not 3 Ulcanix, taking those out of the deck and lowering the main deck count actually is a net decrease in consistency. So I think it's not a problem in this case. But what I wanted to say about normal summons is Ulcanix is now a normal summon, so you have more Fire King type starters without relying on the Snake Eyes stuff. So if this card is normal or special summoned, you can destroy one other fire monster in your hand or face up field, and if you do, add a fire beast, beast warrior, or wing beast monster from your deck to your hand, except itself. What's cool about this is it's not only is fire kind of like the opposite of water traditionally, but it's also tri-type, like, you know, sea serpent, aqua, fish, but here's beast, beast warrior, wing beast. And then you also have, like, you know, I'm pretty sure this is an Atlantean card. I can't recognize it. If somebody knows what that is, I'd be curious in the comments who that is. But because he has a trident, I assume it's some like Atlantean or mermail card. Anyhow, and then it has another effect where if it's destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon the old chicken from your deck in defense position. It's very unfortunate that this can only special from deck, because it means that drawing it is really bad, and having it in the grave, like, even though you technically can access it with some other fire resources, it's just like, you know, this card would have been better if it didn't have to special from deck. But I guess that this is like their way of balancing the deck. And so now that you have these 3 really good normal summons, you may be thinking, well, you only have 3, maybe 4 if you count Ash, 5 with 1 Ponix. And then, you know, okay, you probably have to count the Oak and the Poplar as well, right? Because you can't just guarantee that these are things that you search. You may also draw them because you're in your deck. And so then you're up to like 7 normal summons, and you're probably thinking, you know, 7 isn't too much. That's probably like a decent number of normal summons to have. But the thing is, as you'll see in every single combo that I show, you reliably, unless you're, you know, majorly interrupted, will get access to Ponix as your normal summon, or I guess also the Snake Eye Ash. And so it does make it feel a little bit weird if you have conflicting normals. But then the thing is, the more fires you have in your deck, the better the combinations of cards are. You know, like having a Kirin, for example, makes basically any other combination of cards good. So I feel like it's kind of hard to measure how up or down your consistency goes when it comes to how your deck interacts with normal summons. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that Dominus Impulse is one of the I guess also one of the driving forces of non-engine in the meta. So there was Fuelos, to a lesser degree Perulia, also Droll and Shifter, and this card is one of the stronger non-engine cards, and Fire King is one of the few decks that can play it. It seems like most lists that play Impulse are also playing Valor, and remember, if you activated this card from your hand, you are locked out of Light, Earth, and Wind. So this isn't really a problem with Fuelos, because if you draw the Fuelos, you'll just Fuelos first, and then you can Impulse after. Valor is, you know, technically the same thing, but I feel like it's sometimes can be more awkward to force yourself to Valor first, depending on what they do. So I guess that's just worth mentioning. A couple quick points to note in the extra deck. Some people seem to have conflicting thoughts on Sunlight Wolf, but this is, like, you know, generically like a useful card in this type of deck. Zombie Vampire also seems to be, there isn't like consensus on it per se. I think that because you are playing Ulcanix, which can level modulate, so this can become an 8, for example, and also you have a way to bring another 8 out of your deck, it makes sense to have level 8 options. And the Garunix XYZ card is not something that you would, well, I guess you don't have to make it off of the Sanctuary, because this is the out of turn XYZ, but it does feel nice to have something that's not just typically used as an interruption, but also something that can help you get to engine. And so this is just 2+ level 8 monsters, and you can, you know, potentially mill like a Snake Eyes card or whatever. Yeah, last thing to mention, I guess, is that some people are maining Skyburn and others aren't. So yeah. Anyhow, let's get to some of the combos, and then I'll give you my final thoughts on the deck. So let's see, we have let's start with just the Deception combo. So here you do need a monster to tribute. You can't just tribute anything you want. And similar to the Snake Eyes stuff, you'll go through the Murcielago to give you the Witch. And the reason you do that is because you have 2 bodies on field, so it doesn't matter what else you've drawn, you can make the Masquerena. Or if you're playing Fiendsmith stuff, you can make Closed Heaven. But there are 2 conflicts with Closed Heaven. One is in your own deck. If you're playing Impulse, it means that the Fiendsmith cards are way less reliable. And for example, if you draw Impulse and you use it on your turn and then you draw into a Fiendsmith card on the next turn, that doesn't feel very good. Also, cutting off one of the most powerful engines in your entire deck because you're playing Impulse feels bad. So I feel like if you're playing Fiendsmith, you don't play Impulse, and if you're playing Impulse, you don't play Fiendsmith. The other thing that it conflicts with is it will turn on stuff like Droll, Shifter, and Fool Loss, and I think that that's not worth it if those are some of the most important things in the entire meta, and the Fire King stuff naturally plays around those a lot better than Snake Eyes does. So it's like, why would you give up your edge in the meta just because an engine is broken? You know, I feel like that's probably the bad example of just play cards because they're broken. You need to adapt yourself to what's currently happening in the meta. So anyhow, now that we've gotten our Murcielago in the grave, we can shuffle it back to have Hallowed Azumina to get out the Ilia Sylvia. Now, this part of the combo is the super standard part of the combo, where this is either Masquerena or Closed Heaven if you're playing the Fiends with stuff. And then after this, really what deck you're playing determines what happens next. So here you can banish the original Sinful Spoils, and always remember that this card is you can only use one effect per turn. So if you were playing a Snake Eyes deck, then you'd obviously be searching for the Ash here, or if for some reason you had used your normal, or you felt like you needed your normal for something else, then maybe you would search for the Poplar. But normally you'd be getting the Ash. In this case, you're going to be getting the Ponix, so the little chicken, and you can normal summon that to get the Sanctuary. Also, one of the reasons that you wouldn't main Skyburn is just because in your typical combo, you're searching Sanctuary anyhow, but because this deck is kind of like a multi-layered interactive resource loop type deck, Skyburn still is like realistic to be searched. You know, it's just that it doesn't happen the first turn. So here you get your field spell, and you pop the little chicken to get the big chicken, and then the big chicken can dump Arvata. So some of these combos I feel like on the surface seem more complicated than other decks, but really the theme here is that you always want Arvata in your grave if you have access to Princess, because Princess is what brings your Arvata out. And then this card, if this card is destroyed and sent to the grave, you can target a Fire Beast, Beast Warrior, or Wing Beast and special summon it. So if you have any other target, so here it would be Ponix, it means that when this is destroyed, you're getting a body back. So that's like the one of the basic parts of the resource loop of Fire King, is you destroy the Arvada when there's a fire target in the grave to summon, and also you want to be able to bring this out usually off of the Princess. So yeah, here you see that the Ponix comes out, but it's negated. And then we can go into Princess, so the Masquerena is now in the grave, and that Princess can bring us back the Arvada. So, you know, there obviously are like things that you can lose to, like even traditional hand traps you can lose to, like Nibiru Imperm, because if they, you know, like preemptively imperm your Ilia Sylvia, they could still nib you before you Princess to bring back the Arvada, just like as an example. If you do get to this point, this is, you know, like a good indication that your opponent probably doesn't have a way of stopping this. Another kind of core part of the resource loop or the Fire King game plan is Amble Whale. So this interacts a little bit differently than if you're used to playing Snake Eyes, because with Snake Eyes, typically what you do is the Flamberge is what places the Masquerena in your spell and trap zone, and you will have noticed that we did in fact go through Masquerena. But in this deck, you either don't play the Snake Eyes cards, or you do, but it's not reliable that you'll be able to access it, because you often will have to choose with original Sinful Spoils whether you're playing Fire King or whether you're playing Snake Eyes, unless you happen to have opened multiple engines, in which case you're obviously in a much better position. So, the Masquerena is something that you access through the Amble Whale. So if this card is destroyed, you can target a link 3 or lower monster in your graveyard, special summon it. There's no, you know, condition on it being fire or whatever. And then the other effect is if a link 3 or lower monsters on the field is destroyed by battle or card effect while this card is in your grave, you can banish this card from your grave, destroy one card on the field. So the most important thing in terms of this basic combo is that this is the way that we access the Masquerena. And obviously we can destroy this card almost whenever we want. So if you have access to Kirin, the Kirin could obviously destroy this when you want and bring out the Masquerena. But often what happens in like the basic combo loop is you'll have this. So when a monster effect is activated while this monster is on the field, quick effect, you can negate the activation. And if you do, destroy one other fire monster in your hand or face up field. Maybe it's worth mentioning that this says, and if you do, so I guess if they prevent you from negating the activation, or they have some like cheese play where they move the card around and it's no longer in the location and it can't be negated or whatever, then you wouldn't be able to get the destruction, and so the whale wouldn't be able to bring out the Masquerena. So, yeah. Anyhow, so then also remember that when your original Sinful Spoils is banished, it's the same as it being in the grave in terms of the resource economy for the wanted, so that you can put it back to draw a card. In this case, the thing that's a little bit unfortunate about combining these engines is that in this combo, you always use your normal on the Ponix, and so drawing into an Ash, for example, doesn't help you It's obviously still good because it's gas for the follow-up, but it doesn't continue your basic combo. And then also the last thing I'll mention is that the deception is reset in the end phase, and that's useful because this actually plays really well into the basic Fire King strategy of being multi-layered and kind of cycling your resources, because it is realistic that as you continue to play and it goes to your turn, you know, you've used the Ilia Sylvia, it's in the grave, you've reset the deception, and now you can shuffle back Ilia Sylvia with Hallowed Azamina, and you can just bring it out immediately again in the start of your main phase 1. So that type of like playstyle I think works quite well with the Fire King game plan. Okay, as I showed you in my Snake Eyes video, it's almost exactly the same thing if you start with Witch instead of Deception. It just happens in slightly a different order. So you still make the Murcielago, and the Murcielago searches the original Sinful Spoils, whereas the Witch will set the original Sinful Spoils. But this doesn't matter, because you still make the Masquerena, and then you shuffle back the Murcielago to get the Hallowed Azamina, and Hallowed doesn't care if the Sinful Spoils card is on the field or if it's in your hand. So now you still get the Omni Negate, and here again is the point where you are in the basic board state where this is Masquerena or Closed Heaven. You have the Omni Negate, and then you banish the original Sinful Spoils, and you are choosing which engine you're playing, because you're either getting Snake Eyes Ash or you're getting Ponix. Yeah, so here we get the Ponix. We normal summon the Ponix, and that gives us the Sanctuary, which gives us the island. So we pop the Ponix to get the big chicken, and then we dump the Arvada. Remember, so we've set it up to where there's a target in the grave for Arvada to revive before we destroy it. Okay, and then we make the Princess with the Masquerena, and the Princess gives us back the Arvada, and now we have the Whale on field. So we're no longer fire locked, which means that, you know, when we pop the Whale off of the Arvada, we still get we're not fire locked, so we can bring back the Masquerena. So that's cool. The Deception resets itself in the end phase, and it's exactly the same thing. So the last thing that I wanted to show is Ulcanix, because so far I haven't showed Ulcanix doing anything, because actually I'm not sure if it makes those combos better. If someone knows in the comments, because I haven't tested this enough yet, if it does make it better, let me know. But I feel like those combos lead to basically the same end board if you start with Witch or Deception. But if you do start with Ulcanix, and obviously if you're playing 3, it means that you want to draw it, then you need to it is conditional on being able to destroy a fire in your hand or face up field. So I guess this could be awkward depending on your hand, but assuming you've built your deck in a way where you're always going to have multiple fires, this shouldn't normally be a problem. And the reason that I showed this with Ash is the same reason everyone shows this combo with Ash, which is just you're not getting any benefit off of this. You're not fueling your grave with anything that is useful aside from like a Sunlight Wolf adding back the Ash, which actually does come up. Actually, I forgot to record that combo, but yeah, you can make Sunlight Wolf to add back the Ash, so you haven't really lost it. But then they do know that you have Ash. Anyhow, so this allows us to get access to the Ponix. And so remember that this has a trigger effect. So if your monsters that was originally fire is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. And then the other effect is the on summon effect. So yeah, we did destroy the Ash Blossom, and so we get to trigger this, and then this gives us the Sanctuary. So in this scenario, we get access to the Ponix stuff and our entire engine with the Ulcanix instead of the Deception stuff. And the Deception stuff like isn't better per se, because Deception has to tribute a monster and Witch has to send a card, but you still need a monster to tribute for Deception if you're getting access to Deception through Witch. Whereas this requires a fire. So the condition for this card being useful in doing the combo is different, but I wouldn't say that it's like, you know, better or worse. Maybe they just lose to different things, like, you know, Ogre works obviously on Deception, but not necessarily on other stuff. Yeah, so anyhow, here we're going to pop the Ulcanix off of the field spell. So if this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, this is the one that summons the old chicken. And then we have the big chicken in our hand, which we can special summon because it was just added. So now we have the old chicken, the big chicken, and the little chicken. So this is maximum chickens on field right now. And you remember that you want to destroy the Arvada when you have something you can bring back from the grave, right? So we have the Ulcanix in the grave, which means that now if we destroy Arvada, it actually will bring something back. And then at this point, we're doing the same type of play, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the same exact end board no matter what we draw. So we're trying that, because that's like a sign of good deck building. You don't want your deck ceiling to be wildly different based on what you draw. One of the downsides of something like the traditional pure White Forest build, for example, is drawing Toy Box elevates your deck by an entire tier, and not having it demotes your deck by an entire tier. So what you're trying to do with playing, you know, triple one to triple Witch, triple Deception, triple Ulcanix, is make it to where you're getting the same type of Ambler Whale field. So here we get back the Arvada, and now we have the Ambler Whale. So this is, I guess, you know, worse in the sense that you don't have the Ilia Sylvia, but in terms of the actual resource loop of the deck, you have the whale that can be destroyed by the Arvada, which will then bring out the Masquerena. You know, and then you'll have like the Little Knight, for example. So you do have quite a number of interruptions, and obviously you still have the Princess Engrave, so this is another way of popping like the whale or whatever. But it's also a way of popping the Arvada, because you need to remember, like with this deck, that the whole point of this deck and what separates players who are just learning the combos from being able to actually play it is how well you can cycle through your resource game. So, you know, being able to trigger this on your opponent's turn, for example, and get like something else out so that you can continue cycling through stuff. Like you might be searching for, I don't know, like a Skyburn if you were to cycle through the Ponix or whatever. It really just depends. Or maybe you're trying to get back the Fire King core tier, because this doesn't have to be summoned on your turn. It's just if it's normal or special summoned. As long as you have another fire to destroy, then you can still add, you know, another monster from, like, you could add like a Kirin or whatever. So yeah, the only thing that I would say is like can be a little bit challenging if you don't know how to play the deck super well, or if you're getting interrupted, is if you're not sure how to pop Kirin so that you can get the Kirin pop. Sorry, what I mean by that is, let me just bring up the deck again. So if this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon a Fire King monster from your hand or graveyard, accept itself, and then you can destroy a card on the field. So that non-targeting pop is good, and like, you know, sometimes getting that set up is not always obvious, basically, is what I was trying to say. So my final initial thoughts on this, and I also plan on doing like a slightly more in-depth gameplay analysis video of this, and also the Mermail deck, is this seems to be better positioned than most of the other good decks while still having a very good engine. And what makes this interesting is you could have something like Centurion, where it's way better positioned against those non-engine driving forces like the Mulcharmies, the Drolls, the Shifters, even the Debarriers, stuff like that. It may be better against those types of cards, but the engine isn't comparable to top meta. And then Snake Eyes is like so far ahead, or Yubel rather, is so far ahead of almost any other deck in terms of how good the engine is, but they don't have ways to play around, you know, like a Shotgun Foolos, or like a Shifter, that type of stuff, you know. But this deck seems like a good combination of the engine is actually good, like really good, and it also plays around stuff pretty well. You obviously don't want to get shifted, you know, but you do have better ways under like most of those like really powerful cards like Foolos of still making decent types of boards. You know, like Arvada, for example, that's just a regular monster that you can special summon from the grave. That's not going to trigger your Foolos or whatever. So yeah, that's my basic overview of Fire King. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments. You can join the Discord if you want. The link will be in the description below. Thanks for watching.